Some people believe they know exactly who you are, not because they ever asked, because they decided a long time ago. My brother Daniel had been doing that to me for most of my life. If I came home late, I was probably buried in paperwork. If I missed Thanksgiving, I was probably stuck in another boring meeting. If I refused to answer questions about work, he assumed there was nothing interesting to tell. I never corrected him, not because he was right, because I could not. The fewer people who knew what I actually did, the better. That was one rule I never had the luxury of breaking. The morning our family drove to the White House, my mother could barely stop smiling. After 20 years of organizing community food drives and veterans outreach programs, she had finally been invited to receive a National Volunteer Award. She deserved every bit of it. Daniel treated the invitation as if he had received it himself. He checked everyone's identification twice before we even left the hotel. He reminded us where to stand, when to arrive, and how security would work. Old habits never really leave a former Capitol police officer. I arrived 10 minutes later than everyone else. Not because I wanted attention, because my morning briefing had ended much later than expected. Daniel spotted me the moment I stepped onto the sidewalk. "There you are." He looked at his watch before shaking his head. "You always manage to cut things close." "I made it." "Barely." He pointed toward the line forming near the public entrance. "Everyone goes through that checkpoint." I looked past him. Just beyond the crowd was another security gate. Smaller, quieter, almost empty. Without thinking, I started walking toward it. Daniel caught my arm before I had taken 3 steps. "Wrong entrance." His voice carried just enough that the rest of the family turned to look. "That gate is not for visitors." "I know." I smiled politely and tried to keep walking. He did not let go. A short laugh escaped him. "You are not getting in through there, Claire." A couple standing nearby glanced in our direction. Daniel folded his arms and smiled with the quiet confidence of someone who believed he already knew how this was going to end. "You need special clearance for that entrance." I looked at him for a moment. Then I quietly answered, "I know." He smiled even wider. He thought I was about to be embarrassed. He had no idea. The people waiting behind that gate already knew my name. Daniel kept his hand lightly on my arm, not hard enough to hurt, just enough to stop me from taking another step. "You are walking toward the wrong checkpoint." His voice stayed calm, almost patient, like he was explaining something obvious. "That entrance is reserved for people with permanent clearance." "I know." He let out a small laugh. "No, Claire, I do not think you do." A few people waiting in line glanced in our direction. Most of them smiled politely before looking away again. They probably thought they were watching an ordinary family disagreement. I almost wished they were right. Daniel pointed toward the public security line. "Our names are already on the guest list." "We go through that entrance." He paused for a moment. "The other gate is for people who actually work here." There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. That certainty came from years of standing on the other side of security barriers. He believed every important door had a simple rule. Either your name opened it, or it did not. I looked toward the smaller gate again. 2 uniformed Secret Service officers were standing beside the entrance. Neither of them had moved. Neither of them looked surprised to see me. Daniel noticed where I was looking and quietly shook his head. "I am trying to save you from an embarrassing conversation." I smiled. "I appreciate that." "You should." He glanced at his watch. "We are already running late." "I know." "Then come with us." For a second, I almost did. Life would have been much simpler if I had. Instead, I took one slow step toward the restricted entrance. Daniel sighed. "You really think they are going to let you through?" Before I could answer, Santa. Another question, A black SUV rolled quietly through the security gate. It stopped only a few yards away. A man in a dark navy suit stepped out. He looked around briefly before walking straight toward us. Neither Secret Service officer tried to stop him. One of them actually stepped aside to give him room. The man reached me and offered his hand. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett. I am sorry to interrupt your family morning. We have a situation." Daniel stared at him. The man continued as though nobody else existed. "The National Security Council moved the briefing forward by 20 minutes. They are waiting for you." For the first time all morning, I felt embarrassed. Not because of my brother, because my family had never planned to learn this part of my life in a parking lot. I looked at my mother. "I promise I will explain later." She slowly nodded. She still did not understand. Neither did Daniel. The man in the navy suit glanced toward the White House entrance. "We should go." I picked up my bag. Then I turned back toward my family. Daniel finally found his voice. "Claire." "What exactly do you do?" I held his eyes for a moment. Then I answered with the only words I could safely say. "I help prevent problems most people never hear about." I walked through the restricted gate. The security officers opened it without asking for my identification. Daniel stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching doors open for the sister he thought had no place behind them. The security gate closed quietly behind me. For the first time that morning, the noise from the visitor entrance disappeared. Everything inside felt different. People moved with purpose. Nobody rushed. Nobody raised their voice. The Secret Service officer walked beside me for only a few steps before stopping. "Someone will meet you from here." "Thank you." He nodded once and returned to his post. A woman wearing a White House identification badge approached me with a tablet in her hand. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett." She smiled politely. "I hope traffic was not too bad." "It was manageable." She glanced at the time. They moved the briefing to the Situation Conference Room. I heard. "We are almost ready." She handed me a temporary access badge. Not because security needed to verify who I was, because every visitor inside the complex wore one. As we walked through the hallway, I noticed several familiar faces. Most people only exchanged a nod. Some quietly smiled. Nobody stopped to shake hands. Nobody made a speech. That was normal. People working around national security rarely wasted words. We turned one final corner. Outside a secure conference room, 3 people were already waiting: an Air Force colonel, a Homeland Security director, and a senior intelligence analyst I had worked with months earlier. The analyst looked up as I approached. "I am glad you made it." "So am I." He opened the conference room door. "We have a ransomware attack spreading through multiple federal networks. The first reports came in less than an hour ago. We need another set of eyes before we make our recommendation." I stepped inside. The room was filled with maps, live network diagrams, and large digital displays. No politicians, no cameras, no reporters, just people trying to solve a problem before millions of Americans ever knew it existed. That was always the goal. If we did our jobs well, nobody would ever hear our names. I placed my laptop on the table and opened the first report. Before I could read a single page, my phone vibrated once. One new message. It was from Daniel. Only 5 words. "Who are you, Claire?" I stared at the screen for a moment before locking the phone. There was only one person who deserved that answer, and I knew I would be seeing him again before the day was over. The briefing lasted a little over an hour. By the time we finished, the cyber attack had already begun to slow. Another team would take over from there. That was how our work usually ended. No applause, no headlines. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing thousands of people would never realize how close the country had come to a serious crisis. As I walked back toward the visitor entrance, I spotted my family waiting near the fountain. My mother smiled the moment she saw me. Daniel did not. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, staring at the ground. When I reached him, he looked up. "I owe you an apology." His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "I spent years thinking I knew what success looked like." He let out a slow breath. "I judged you because I could not see what you were doing." I smiled. "You only saw the part of my life I was allowed to show." He shook his head. "No. I saw what I wanted to see." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he laughed softly. "I actually tried to stop you from walking through that gate." "You did." "I thought I was protecting you." "You were." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You were being my brother." His eyes filled with emotion. "I just wish I had trusted you sooner." "So do I." Then I hugged him, not because he had admitted he was wrong, because family is worth more than being right. As we walked away from the White House together, my mother slipped her arm through mine. She smiled and whispered, "I always knew you were doing something important." I smiled back. "You always respected my silence." She squeezed my hand. "I respected my daughter." That meant more to me than any security clearance ever could. Some people measure success by titles. Others measure it by recognition. I learned a long time ago that the most meaningful work often happens where cameras are never allowed. The doors that matter most are usually the ones very few people ever notice. Before you go, I would love to hear from you. Which country are you watching from? And what kind of story would you like to hear next? Family betrayal, courtroom drama, military honor, inheritance revenge, or something completely different? If you enjoyed this story and want more original, high-retention stories every week, make sure to subscribe to Public Evidence and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one.